Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and you're all very welcome to the 15th webinar in the Irish Bioenergy Association webinar series. Our topic this morning is showcasing Europe's most advanced Irish-owned biorefinery. My name is Sean Finan, and I am the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association, and I will be your chairperson for this morning's webinar. Just before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce you to the Irish Bioenergy Association, as again this morning we have a number of attendees who haven't joined us previously. So we were established in 1999. We are the representative body, a voice for the Irish bioenergy industry on the island of Ireland. Our main areas of work include biomass, biogas, biofuels, biochar, wood fuels and energy crops. Our main work is associated with policy, lobbying and advocacy, and indeed transferring knowledge to our members. We have a broad and diverse membership and are open to new members. And we also roll out a number of research projects on wood fuels, biogas, biochar and other topics. And if you want to find out more about the organisation, you can check out our website at erbia.org. We also work towards a sustainable energy future with bioenergy. This morning's agenda is and we're delighted to be joined by James Cogan, who is from the ClonBio Group, and James will present on the topic this morning. We're also joined by Michael Doran, who is one of the erbia directors, and Michael will share his own experiences of visiting the ClonBio Group plant in Hungary over a year ago. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers, and you can submit your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible. Just to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website in the coming days after the webinar concludes. Just a small bit of information about the webinar series. We have been running successfully since the middle of last year. This is number 15 in our series. You can review all previous webinars on our website, and there is a bank of very valuable resources there and information on a wide variety of topics associated with the bioenergy area. If any members or stakeholders or attendees this morning would like to get in touch with the organisation, you can contact us via the email addresses as shown on the screen, and we'd be happy to assist you with whatever your query may be. Our next webinar will take place on Wednesday, the 10th of February, 2021, from 9:30 to 10:30, and we will publish in the coming days the topic and speakers for our next webinar. Just a brief introduction. So what is the bioeconomy? And I quote the European definition, the EU Commission definition. So the bioeconomy is the production of renewable biological resources and the conversion of these resources and waste streams into value-added products such as food, feed, bio-based products and bioenergy. And this morning we will be taking through what the ClonBio Group is doing in terms of production of all of these products. There is an increased focus on the bioeconomy in both Ireland and Europe. There's a lot of work being done by the Department of Agriculture to grow and develop the bioeconomy in Ireland. And this work is very valuable and very important. Ireland has a national policy statement on the bioeconomy, and indeed the ClonBio plant Panonia Bio in Hungary is a true example of Europe's most advanced Irish-owned biorefinery, which is driving the bioeconomy. Now to introduce our speaker for this morning, James Cogan is an industry and policy analyst at the ClonBio Group. He has a wide range of expertise across EU climate, innovation and economic policy. Currently working on the introduction of E10 petrol in Ireland. That is the increase in the blend up to 10% with ethanol in petrol in Ireland, and we fully support that campaign and are working with James to try and ensure that that is introduced as quickly as possible in the country, and James will speak about that this morning. James is a member of the private sector mechanism of the EU Committee on Food Security, and he represented the World Climate Ethanol Alliance as partner to the UNFCCC at COP24 in 2018 and COP25 in 2019. And he has worked for the European Commission and its partners on innovative finance and innovative project development. And then just a brief introduction to the ClonBio Group. This presentation or this webinar will provide a snapshot of an Irish-led company which is at the centre of the European bioeconomy and its origin path taken so far and what it actually does. ClonBio Group was founded in 2008 and is operating its refinery in Hungary since 2010 and has gone on to be one of Europe's most dynamic bioeconomy investors. So it's with great pleasure that I hand over to James, who will now take us through his presentation. And as I said, we'd be happy to take any questions you have and answer them at the end of James's presentation. So thanks very much, James, for joining us. And I now hand over to you. I'll stop sharing and allow you to share your screen. Thanks, James.
Good morning. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody. Great to see so many people here. Can I just check? Can you see my screen okay, Sean?
Just go to presentation mode, James. Yeah, and we can.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, great. So my name is James Cogan. I have been working with ClonBio since about 2014, 2015. I have, and I've worked with them for the most part on kind of relations with EU institutions, governments, government agencies, NGOs, and so on. Also on some industrial project development. So ClonBio is the Irish group, and the principal operating body in it is Panonia Bio. So I'm going to refer to it for the most part as Panonia Bio because that's really what most people knows that organization as, that commercial organization. I go around with the words Ethanol Europe on my business card because Ethanol Europe is one of the kind of brand names of the group. And we use it when we're referring specifically to the whole notion of ethanol as a biofuel and why it's a good thing and why there should be better policy support for it. So it kind of serves my purpose as that. I'm going to give you a snapshot of Panonia and ClonBio today. The idea of doing this webinar arose from 1 year ago exactly. A group from Irbea came to see the plant, and we had at the time hoped to be able to bring groups of people from Ireland and Irbea to the plant in every couple of months since then, because it's such an inspiring place to visit and it's such an inspiring story to hear. And clearly that hasn't been possible. So the whole thing has been on hold ever since. But what I would say about the plant, there's kind of a little slightly older picture of it there on the right, is that no matter how much I say here today, there's nothing as inspiring as actually visiting it. It's an extraordinary place to go and see, and people are kind of gobsmacked at the end of a trip there for the complexity of it, the scale of it, the stories and anecdotes of how each bit of it emerged and how quickly it's emerged, because 10 years ago there was nothing there at all, essentially. And it's also amazingly enough for kind of a factory, a chemical factory, it's a very attractive place to visit. It's very clean, it's beautifully landscaped, everything is polished and painted. It smells nice, it feels nice everywhere you go. So, and it's in an extraordinarily beautiful setting. So I shall move. So in brief, opened for business in the period 2010-2012. The main products are ethanol, animal feed called distillers, grains and solubles in the business, and corn oil. It's located in Hungary on the Danube, 1 hour south of Budapest. So typically, if any of you do get to come over and see it, it involves a 24-hour trip, getting on a Ryanair flight in the afternoon, staying overnight, and then the plant visit in the morning, and then back in the afternoon. It was founded by the Irish ClonBio Group, obviously. It's trebled in size or more since its first kind of full year of operation. And it's diversified greatly in terms of types of energy, grades of energy, types and grades of nutrition, and bio-based materials. And it is an inspiring European biorefinery case study. And the stress I would put on that is that in Europe we have an huge amount of, let's say, promotion and I nearly call it propaganda about the bioeconomy. And yet a huge number of the kind of people involved in that promotion propaganda haven't been to see a big industrial scale biorefinery, or at least not often enough or not recent enough. And we are forever inviting officials from all the European bodies in Brussels and Europe to come and see it in order to, I guess, in many respects, kind of correct some of the perceptions and to inspire. So a decade ago, when this all started, the drivers were clearly there was a hunt on for renewable energy, and the people who founded the company had taken the view that renewable energy was where to go, irrespective of the type of renewable energy. And then there was a kind of a protracted period where a kind of a selection was made and an analysis of what kinds of renewable energy to go into, and the outcome of it was to go into ethanol, which is a substitute for petrol, which gets blended into petrol to reduce the carbon footprint of petrol use, and also to improve other aspects of how petrol vehicles operate. So it makes the tailpipe emissions cleaner, it makes the engines run a bit better, but principally it reduces the carbon footprint. There was an important piece of regulation emerging at the time, the first Renewable Energy Directive, and member states were busy working on their biofuels blending regulations. So in Ireland, we have a biofuels blending regulation which imposes on fuel suppliers to put into their fuels a certain portion of biofuels, and that includes petrol, obviously, and ethanol answers very well to that, and hence the kind of commercial opportunity for it. Why ethanol? Why petrol? Well, we have a huge road transport fleet in Europe. It's about 320 million vehicles, and that's growing about 1% a year. So in 2019, we added 3 million vehicles to the fleet in Europe, and Ireland was no different to that. We added a whole bunch of vehicles pretty much in the same proportion. And of those additional vehicles in the fleet in 2019 in Europe, just to give you an idea of how important it is to reduce the carbon footprint of petrol and diesel, of the 300 million, or the 3 million extra fleets in Europe, and just the extra ones, 100,000 of them are powered by additional renewable electricity. So as the fleet grows, the energy demand grows along with it. Just on the additional portion alone, 100,000 powered by renewable electricity, and the rest of it powered by fuels, liquid fuels, so diesel and petrol. Of the rest of it, which is the vast majority of the additional fleet, roughly in Europe, half of that was biofuels and the other half was oil. So EVs are an important portion of additions to the fleet and additions to energy demand, but oil and biofuels are definitely the lion's share by a long shot. In Ireland, specifically in 2019, in fact, there was an increase in transport demand. For the first time ever, Ireland, unlike Europe, all of that transport demand was met by renewables, and all of that was bioenergy. The amount of it that was renewable electricity was marginal at best. Other condition kind of at the time when Panonia was founded was the European intervention maize mountain. So we had an awful lot of grain crops in storage that the taxpayers' money was paying to store. So there was plenty of feedstock available. And the plant was set up in Hungary because Hungary is a very strong maize producer, a very attractive place for inward investment. A big part of the drive to build this thing was obviously a vision to do more of the same. So this would have been the first of several of these operations. First, for several of these operations, that didn't happen. It stayed the only one. It stayed the only one because before the ink was even dry on the Renewable Energy Directive, the European Commission started changing it, and changing it dramatically and reversing direction in terms of renewable energy and support for biofuels. So even though the second plant was already being built and they were up to ground level with the building and a significant amount of money had been spent on it, it was cancelled. And we didn't build another plant. We did, however, invest hugely in the existing one, and it is unrecognizable to compare to what it was like 10 years ago. So the main things that have been kind of the drivers that have kind of conditioned the way the thing has developed in the last 10 years have been that regulatory uncertainty, meaning that we didn't build any other plants, but nobody else did either. So essentially, supply capacity has remained reasonably static and handled by the same projects that were already existing when we set up shop. There's been significant anti-bioeconomy sentiment. I attended a bioeconomy meeting in Ireland, I guess 18 months ago, and the opening video was of forests being burnt down, as if that was the key. And these were bioeconomy supposed stakeholders and leaders, and for some reason it was allowed that the whole thing be, the whole event be conditioned by this image of burning forests, which is not what the bioeconomy is about. And that kind of sentiment has affected let's say the virtuous and very constructive and positive sectors like ourselves. So we produce ethanol from crops grown in Europe. It is 100% virtuous. There are no adverse effects, and yet we are continuously subject to negative sentiment from people who should know better, including, senior government officials, politicians, European Commission officials. And that has been created by a mix of oil sector lobbying, which has been effective, and NGO, I guess, idealism or opportunism. Other things, huge electric vehicle expectations. So the general sentiment is that electric vehicles will be the knight in shining armor and will essentially solve all the problems. EVs have been much slower to develop than expected. But that hasn't stopped people assuming that they will solve all the problem. So a very kind of straightforward analysis of the fleet size and fleet dynamics would enable anybody to understand that, unfortunately, the kind of fleet of internal combustion engines is huge, and it will continue to be huge for a long time, even under the best conditions of EV take-up. We've had that investment stagnation, as I've said, caused by regulatory uncertainty. In all that, we've had solid demand nonetheless. So, that's been good for business, and I'll come to that. I'll come to why that's the case in a moment. Internally, the driver has been operational excellence. So it's, if you visit the plant, there's a bunch of extraordinary capable people handling the engineering and the operations and the trading and the marketing and the finance. And it's just, I've worked in half a dozen companies, and it's just an extraordinary place to be. It's a very lean organization and very efficient, ruthlessly efficient. There's been breathtaking innovation. So if you visit the plant, every 3 months there are noticeable changes, and each one of them is a story in itself. There is extraordinary leadership, so an awful lot of kind of charisma, intelligence, courage, and support for the team. So it's a great place to work. The local conditions are great for running and operating such a place. And then, of course, there's a virtuous cycle of success. So the place has been a success since day one, and that just keeps going on. There's an expectation of success and a behavior for success, I suppose. Core business is ethanol. Ethanol is made in Europe mostly from grain and beet. So we take the starches and sugars in those plants and ferment them and then distill the alcohol out of it. Ethanol, when used as a fuel, results in 75% less carbon emissions than petrol on a energy for basis. 20% cleaner air, so that's essentially reduced particulates emissions, because ethanol is not only a clean burning fuel in its own right, but it results in petrol burning cleaner as well. It boosts EU protein security and resilience, and it results in €6 billion in farm incomes around Europe, which is, compared to, say, CAP budgets, it's about 15% of the CAP budget, so it's a significant part of the farm economy. Ethanol is blended in variously rates of 5, 10, 15, 85% into petrol. They're the different kind of petrol standards that allow for it. Ireland is only at 5%, so definitely laggard status in Europe, which is rapidly tending towards 10%. The US is moving to 15% ethanol, and France's 85% ethanol blend petrol is rapidly taking market share. We have a key factor in Europe in terms of crop biofuels, such as ethanol, which is the Renewable Energy Directive crop cap, which imposes a maximum upper amount of biofuels that can be consumed of 2020 levels plus 1%. That red crop cap would appear to be a very negative signal for the sector. And it is, and it shouldn't be there. It's an arbitrary cap that doesn't distinguish between, say, destructive biofuels made from things like palm oil and constructive biofuels made from domestic European crops. That crop cap should be replaced with a more intelligent, nuanced management approach, where the good ones are supported and the bad ones are managed appropriately. However, despite the kind of negative policy conditions for crop biofuels in Europe, the EU, UK and Ireland generally are tending towards a 10% blending of ethanol in the fuel, as opposed to an average of 5%, which has been the case for the last few years. Ethanol will be good for replacing the share that palm oil has in biofuels, as palm oil is still allowed by the European Union. It shouldn't be, and it should be phased out. It is being phased out by 2030, but there are a number of loopholes that still enable it to exist on quite a large scale. Used cooking oil is the gold rush sector of European biofuels at the moment. So used cooking oil is increasing at about 45% per year in Europe, and Ireland is leading the charge. This share of used cooking oil will start dropping at a certain stage. It might not have peaked yet, but it will peak, and it'll drop because most of the additional supplies of used cooking oil are coming from outside Europe, where it's impossible to ensure traceability. So, and used cooking oil costs considerably more than palm oil, and the problem with imported used cooking oil is you'll often find a palm tree at the other end of the supply chain and not a restaurant frying things. But the future should look better, as used cooking oil is, the imported stuff is replaced by genuine European stuff collected here, or by other kinds of biofuels. We have advanced biofuels in the energy mix for the transport sector. They're much slower on the uptake than is expected also, and slower on the uptake than the policy is designed for. Renewable electricity is also very slow on the uptake, contrary to policy hopes and expectations. So ethanol in all this, even though we actually love it, for policymakers, it's more of a you'll do solution. It is very good for taking up the slack where other forms of renewable energy are not developing as quick, or where they need to be replaced. In all of this, of course, oil remains the big problem. And the one thing Europe doesn't have and Ireland doesn't have is a cap on oil, or an actual determination to drive down oil at all costs by a certain amount per year. And if I was to leave everybody with one renewable energy message, it would be cap oil and start driving it down, or we're not going to make enough progress. Other part of the core business is the animal feed. So we have a branded animal feed line called Panonia Gold, and it has really become a market leader. It has helped brand the whole area of feeds from biofuels, which in the past tended to be treated as a waste given to animals if they'd eat it, whereas now it's actually become the core business of the sector. And it is, the whole plant is managed around the idea of making sure that this animal feed is of the utmost kind of highest quality possible, and also consistent, attractive to look at, to smell and to eat for animals. And then from an important kind of positioning point of view, it's GMO free, it's antibiotic free, which is not the case with imported equivalents. It's certified GMP and VLOG. In our case, it's single source, so you can trace it back to the individual farm. We have very consistent, reliable production and a very consistent, well-managed nutritional profile. We have also conducted scientific work to ensure that we're helping the feedstock owners, the livestock owners, to understand how best to blend it in the animal rations, how to use it in the optimum way in the different sectors, whether it's poultry or pigs or fish. And we have continuously improving versions of it. In the last year, the protein content has risen considerably as we have implemented new technology to extract the fiber from it and increase the protein content. I want to go back to that again. Well, important thing about biofuel sector, apart from its contribution to renewable energy, is its contribution to food and protein security in Europe. So the European livestock sector has a dependency on a high protein meal for its feed rations for the livestock. So that's mostly, if you imagine it, it's that meal that you see in being transported around the country between kind of feed meal companies and put into the silos for the livestock at the farms. 3/4 of Europe's high protein meal is imported, and that's mostly soy meal from North and South America. Those are regions, especially in a large portion of it comes from areas of low sustainability, so regions with high levels of deforestation and also with GMO agriculture. Of the fraction not imported, so just under 30%, most of that non-imported fraction is actually meal from the biofuel sector. Protein security is one of the key issues facing European agriculture. The only thing standing really, or the primary thing standing between complete dependency on imports and the little degree of independence, or the degree of independence we have, is the European biofuel sector. We could easily double the amount of European biofuels that we consume in Europe's renewable energy system at the moment. And that would mean we'd easily double the amount of protein meal that we'd have available. It would be a very kind of virtuous win-win, and providing for kind of resilience in the European food chain and assuring the kind of continued role of biofuels as a food and feed solution. Biogas. In 2020, we commissioned one of Europe's largest anaerobic digesters, highly strategic for the company. It is one of the largest, about 20 megawatt in thermal energy. It is going to be fed, or it's being fed by fiber that we take out of the maize at the milling stage at the input side of the plant. That fiber traditionally goes through the whole processing cycle of an ethanol plant, and that's pretty much the same all over Europe and the US, anywhere where that ethanol is made. And that fiber is essentially kind of parasitic insofar as it occupies capacity of the process, but doesn't really add any value along the way. And it ends up in the animal feed at the other end. And it's not what the livestock owners are buying when they buy that animal feed. They're simply, it's that fiber is simply traveling along in the system without anybody necessarily wanting it there and without adding any value. So taking it out at the front end, as we've just started doing a year ago, has made the whole process more efficient as far as it's got more capacity for actual useful, valuable processing of starch into ethanol. And the fiber itself then can be diverted into an anaerobic digestion plant as the size we've just built. And that plant then can replace energy that we've been taking off the national grid to date. So it reduces the energy footprint of the plant, the carbon footprint of the plant, makes the plant more efficient, turns fiber, which is essentially a waste or a waste or residue of the whole system, into an energy product. So it's one of a number of massive innovations that came about at the plant in the last year. It's the first of a kind in this sector. You won't find that kind of marriage of technologies and processes in another ethanol plant in the world. And I guess in terms of biogas as an addition to our portfolio of activities, is because, well, biogas is, we see it as the sleeping beauty of European renewable energy. It's a highly versatile form of energy made from an enormous variety of things. So you make it from crop residues, food waste, the waste from the organic fraction of urban waste, industrial organic waste. And likewise, it can be used in all kinds of ways. So it can be used on site to produce heat and power if it's needed on site near whereby it's produced. It can be turned into electricity and put onto the electricity grid and used off-site, or it can be injected onto the grid or transported by truck to other places for use. And that's just that's a magically versatile way of doing things. The model in Ireland is green generation in Kildare, which is producing biogas from food surplus waste. And I guess the magic of what green generation is doing is that they're taking food surplus waste that would end up in landfill or incineration, or exported to outside of Ireland to places where they actually can use that food surplus waste in their own energy systems. So green generation is making sure that we can keep it in Ireland without the additional kind of carbon impact of having it transported abroad. And in parallel, green generation are taking all of the packaging of the food surplus waste. So this is kind of supermarket factory waste, or food that wasn't consumed for one reason or another because of defective or expiry dates. And they turn the bio fraction into energy, and the materials, the physical solid materials of the packaging, into recycled products. And that is inspirational. And I guess in addition to building our own biogas plant in the last year, the green generation model is, we're finding, inspirational for other development projects that we are looking at in and around the region where we are already. All of this is dependent on bioeconomy legislation. We wouldn't exist if there wasn't bioeconomy legislation, because the fossil economy is just so huge, low cost, and incumbent and powerful. There's no point in doing bioeconomy things unless you do them, well, let's say bioeconomy will have an impact when it's done on scale. The fossil economy is all about scale, whether it's energy or materials, and the bioeconomy needs to be about scale as well. And we as ClonBio Group see things in terms of scale. There's no point in doing things for our way of doing things if you can't do them on scale. Do things on scale requires regulation that works at scale. So big is important, and that's part of our kind of key, messaging when we're speaking with policymakers. The renewable energy part of what we do means that things get to scale quickly, and that can lead to major platform investments in the bioeconomy generally. And that's why we've been able to evolve into a hub of bioeconomy investment, innovation, and industrialization. Conversely, a kind of a stagnant policy context leads to stagnation and lost opportunity. And Europe and Ireland are much more remarkable for the lost opportunities and the stagnation than the progress. And that's why we're so eager for people for policymakers from Europe and Ireland to visit the plant and to learn about it. There would be 100 Panonias in the UK and Ireland right now had we had the right policy leadership 10 years ago. So what you see today, the site is called Dunafoldvar. The location is Dunafoldvar, south of Budapest. The site is rapidly evolving. It's the largest single-site ethanol plant in the world. There are companies larger than us, but they just have multiple plants. It's one of the largest anaerobic digestion plants in Europe. We have projects emerging off-site and in other countries. On site, if you visit it, you'll see a half a dozen pilot projects dotted around it, little container offices, tented structures, vehicles, pieces of equipment, and you'll find engineers and scientists around them developing them. And these are all kind of process innovations that we're bringing from kind of laboratory to industrial scale. Investments at the site and the company are in the region of many tens of millions per year. They're in efficiencies, yield, new core processes and ancillary processes, as well as those standalone projects. It's a huge contributor to the local and national economy. I grew up as a kind of a child of foreign direct investment. My father worked in Pfizer in Cork, and I can see Panonia is doing for the region what Pfizer did when I was a child. It simply boosts the whole, it raises all the boats. And at any one time, ClonBio is scouting and evaluating dozens of project ideas and bringing them to various stages of maturity. We contribute now hundreds of millions to the GDP of the country where we're located in Hungary. Over 100 million in revenues to the government. We've got several hundred employees within the operation itself, and about 5,000 indirect jobs have been, permanent jobs have been created. We bring a couple of €100 million to farmers in the area in farm demand and steady, reliable, predictable farm demand, and then several €100 million more in value add within the region. So when they sell their crops, it's not just being siphoned off and going, disappearing off to China to feed livestock over there, but it's staying nearby, and the value add is resulting in hundreds of millions more for local economy. It has reversed migration of skilled people from the area. As said before, 75% reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and the lowest cost means of reducing carbon footprint of the transport system at the moment. Reduction of the protein deficit in Europe. We have, in terms of the types of innovative products and processes we have, so we have several different types of energy. So we've ethanol, we've the gas, we also have a bunch of solar energy projects that have come developed over the last couple of years. And within the energy range we have ranges, we have energy of different sustainability ratings, which has, they're slightly different markets depending on the credentials of the energy. Then we have all the several different grades of animal feed, and then we have projects were emerging for bio-based materials and packaging, for animal and human nutrition, and in a number of other materials. We're definitely a best-in-class in terms of the most efficient operator in the sector, and we meet or outperform all of the kind of relevant standards for climate, energy, pollution, water use, etc. So on the left-hand side, you'll see pretty much what the site looked like 10 years ago, with a silo from another company coming down onto the River Danube. And the right-hand side, a photograph from last summer, whereby pretty well everything from that silo over to the right is new. and in another few years that will be even bigger. So I'd be very delighted if anybody would like to contact me to arrange a visit at some stage when that becomes possible again. Thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Sean.
Thanks very much, James, for your presentation. It gives a wonderful insight into what you're doing at the plant, and certainly the broad range of products which you're producing. And I visited the plant as part of the delegation over a year ago and was very impressed with what I saw. I'd now like to introduce Michael Doran. Michael is a director of Verbia. You're welcome, Michael, and thanks for joining us this morning. And you also were one of the attendees at the site visit in Hungary. So maybe just briefly, Michael, if you could give us your own insight into what you saw, just as a way of kind of confirming what James has presented and the story which he has told. Thanks, Michael.
Sean, thank you very much. James, thanks very much for an excellent presentation. Yeah, as Sean has said, I had the opportunity to go out about a year ago and look at the site, and some of the words that James used during his presentation, I would use as well: inspiring, and also the complexity and the innovation on the site. So for instance, he was talking towards the end of his presentation about the biogas. When I was there, they had not yet got the anaerobic digestion plant up and running. That now is. So they're taking in maize and they're producing starch, protein, fiber, and oils. In total, they're producing about 500 million litres of ethanol annually. So that's about 500,000 tonnes. They're also producing about 350,000 tonnes of animal feed. And all of their both their input and their output is sustainable. Now, I've seen lots of interesting questions coming in, so I'm only going to speak for about a minute or two, because I think some of the questions will develop what James has been talking about very well. But what I just want to do is take a minute to talk about the relevance of bioethanol to the Irish Bioenergy Association. So the first thing I would say is, because of the economies of scale, it is probably unlikely that there will be a large bioethanol plant in Ireland. But one of the opportunities that Ireland had last year, there was a consultation on going from, and James was talking about this, from E5 to E10, which is increasing the amount of bioethanol that goes into the petrol mix. Ireland had that opportunity. It would have reduced carbon emissions immediately within Ireland by about 90,000 tonnes a year. And I don't understand why it didn't go ahead. The same consultation, or a very similar consultation, ran in the UK at the same time, and they've decided to move to E10. James also talked about moving to E15, moving to E85. That will happen, but I don't understand why it's not happening now. One of the other things that he talked about, some of you will be aware of a thing called LULUCF, which is land use change in forestry. And that is basically measuring the sustainability of trying to develop the bioeconomy, doing it in a way which doesn't damage either the agri-economy or the other economy or the environment. And while all of those need to be taken into consideration, I don't think that Ireland is moving fast enough. It certainly moved well on electricity, but electricity is only about 30% of the energy that we use. Heating is about 45%, and we're only at about 6% renewable heat. Transport is about 25% of energy consumption, and we're only at about 3%. So there's a marvelous opportunity to make a change within the heating and transport, and bioethanol is part of that. Bioethanol is not the only solution, but it's part of the solution. And certainly, in summarizing, I would say that moving to electric transport is not the solution for the entire transport fleet. Just want to say again, thanks very much to James. I see one of the questions is already, how can I get to Budapest to go and see Panonia? James will talk about that, because it is an inspiring place to visit. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael. And you can remain with us and maybe contribute to some of the answers to the questions which are here. So James, you probably have had a quick chance to look through some of the questions. We have quite a number, so we'll quickly run through them. The first one from Cara. Can the product, and I assume she means ethanol, be burned in industrial boilers where coal, oil, gas is currently burned? We're in need of a transition fuel, which gas seems to be filling. Also, can it be used in the hard-to-abate sectors of cement, steel, which need high temperatures? So just if you could comment on that, James.
Well, so there's a massive, across all of the sectors that consume high amounts of energy, whether that's cement, industry, transport, aviation, so on, there's a search on for renewable forms of energy. And it's going to be quite a scramble for those sectors to replace their fossil energy with renewables. You could use ethanol in lots of other sectors. It is really good for petrol sector internal combustion engines. So it's a question of doing what's optimum, and there are other ways you could use to transition to renewable energy in those other sectors. And we're going to need the ethanol in the transport sector for a long time. So I'd kind of stick with that.
Okay, James. Moving on. The question here: if you want to remove huge amounts of petrol and diesel cars,
very good question. So,
yeah, what percentage?
What I would say to that person is, I and we would hope that the transport system can transition to a kind of an emissions-free system as soon as possible. So that's nobody's questioning that. And what I would say is that if you look at the data, you'll see that we're not removing huge amounts of petrol and diesel cars from the roads as it is. It's just not happening. And we have to make policy, and we have to do things that address what's the actual real world situation rather than what we'd like it to be. Even if you were to calculate how many petrol and diesel cars you could take off the roads, make it the most ambitious, aggressive estimate you can come up with, and then double it, we'll still be busy. And you can, of course, fuel cars and vehicles with up to 95% or 100% ethanol. They're slightly different engines that we have now. So even a very small fleet would still keep us in business for a long time. I hope that answers the question.
What happens to the waste from the AD plant? So the digestate material produced after the biogas process?
Yeah, it's a very consistent quality of digestate, and it goes straight back out onto the land as a soil enhancement. So it's an organic enhancement of the fertilizer.
Okay. The question here on the life cycle increase in energy from the production of the ethanol. Many biofuels require more energy to create them than the energy which they produce. So do you want to comment on that, James?
Yeah, well, in the case of ethanol, we're producing a lot more energy. We're getting more energy out than we put in. Obviously, most of the energy is coming from sunlight, which is producing starch, which we're then converting to ethanol.
And your life cycle analysis of the plant would be better as a result of producing so many different products as well. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the carbon impact, the life cycle impact of the plant is gets more efficient as we go along. And we would compare it to kind of a smartphone. It's a new generation every couple of years in terms of the technology that we're using and the rapidity with which the life cycle characteristics improve. So all of the inputs are distributed over several outputs. So there's the energy itself, and then there's the feed and the digestate and the other products that we have, and that all goes to reduce the life cycle of the carbon footprint of the energy we put into the cars. As you can see, even with the biogas plant, a considerable proportion of our own energy now is will be supplied by our own on-site biogas energy. Even by taking the fiber out of the system going in, we can get more ethanol out from the same inputs, the same infrastructures. So that all improves it. So every year we're getting, a 1 to 2% improvement in the life cycle profile of the product coming out. Okay.
Moving on. James, a question from Teresa here. She thanks you for the presentation, great insight. What would you say is the single biggest learning for you and the ClonBio Group over the years? So would you comment on that, James?
Well, that you can reach industrial levels of impact in the bioeconomy in very short amounts of time under the right conditions. I would say ClonBio has done it under not great conditions from a policy point of view. A lot of other people walked away from the whole thing. But I think it's the inspirational impact of seeing what can be done when the will is there. We have an anonymous attendee here asking about how is Panonia, a virtuous company, contending with the fact that it's supporting a Hungarian government which is eroding human rights year on year. So it's more of a political question. Is it something you'd like to comment on? I don't know. We try not to get involved in politics. In political issues. What I would say is Hungary is a very attractive country for a lot of people to invest in. For instance, an awful lot of car engines are built there, and an awful lot of electrical appliances are built there. So it is one of the, let's say, a factory of Europe, and it's a very good factory of Europe. And there are many companies asking themselves the same question. I don't know where it'll go, And that was very clear on the visit when we travelled from down to the plant. It was very clear that it had a good industrial base. Okay, another question from Cara there. In terms of the products, how does the value vary in percentage across the outputs of biogas, bioethanol, and animal feeds? So, can you? Well, the ethanol and animal feed are absolutely the undisputed anchor products of the whole thing. And in terms of volume, they're half and half, they're 50-50. In terms of value, the ethanol is obviously achieves, gets a higher price per ton than the feed. But you couldn't do one without the other, and there are core businesses. The biogas we're still using on site. We'll definitely clean it and inject it onto the grid when, regulatory and commercial conditions make that the right thing to do. Okay, a question from Porrick, and I suppose it's a very interesting one and one that's important. So, how has the Panonia plant benefited Hungarian farmers in terms of providing a stable market for maize? So, can you comment on that? Well, I'll start by the big picture. So there's a few dozen plants like ours in the ethanol sector in Europe, and then there's a bunch of oilseed processing plants in Europe, all resulting in biofuels, whether it's for diesel or petrol. And between them, they buy €6 billion worth of crops from European farmers. And that's got that's hugely valuable in stabilizing the market. That will always hopefully that will always be there. It should be double what it is. And it's an amazing stabilization impact. In terms of the Hungarian farmers, they can drive up with one trailer load and sell it. They can sell it in advance to us. They know we'll always be there, which means that they can finance their investments on the basis of it, and they do. We have developed a close kind of symbiotic relationship with them. We sell direct, or we buy direct. So it's completely changed the way, the landscape for a farmer selling grain. We represent, a couple of €100 million of guaranteed demand right there on the doorstep. Okay. I'll bring you in a second, Michael, maybe just to explain what you actually saw in terms of the grain intake and all of that in a second. A question here from Dara. James, Europe has changed its tack from bioethanol, and wrongly because of the feed versus fuel debate in this person's opinion, and has now hitched its wagon to H2 solar and electric, especially in the context of the new EU Green Deal. Is it too late for AD, biogas and bioethanol scale in the EU at this stage? So no, not too late at all. I mean, sure, the Green Deal talks of H2 solar and electricity massively and excludes AD, biogas and bioethanol largely. But that is, H2 solar and electric, they're simply not going to scale up at the speed. There's plenty of need and scope for AD, biogas and bioethanol, and their time will come back again. These are cycles, and there's no doubt about it, AD, biogas and bioethanol will be around and thriving in 10 years' time. I just bring you in, Michael, there on that particular point. If you could comment just about your own views on the potential for AD, biogas, and in Ireland, because it's something which we haven't seen the government support, but lots of potential. So maybe if you just comment on that, Michael, and also just
what you physically saw in terms of the plant, in terms of the intake and all of that, and the activity levels.
Okay, I'll do the first one, which is the impact on farming. When I was there, which was this time last year, they were generating approximately 175 million euro of income for local farmers, and all of those farmers within about a 35 kilometer base of where the factory is positioned. They had a very innovative way of collecting the maize. So one of the things that we obviously said is, you only harvest at a certain time of year, so do you have a problem in the winter when you're not harvesting? But they've got a very advanced system where they know they're going to bring in the maize from, so they contract with individual farmers at different times of the year at different rates. So a farmer who's going to have to store the maize and will deliver in the winter may get a slightly higher price than the guy who's delivering fresh out of the field in the summer. So a very innovative way, and it's also a way that not only suits the factory, but also suits the farmers. Moving on to the question from Dara, for the last 6 years, I've also been a director of Bioenergy Europe, which is the European Association of associations. So for instance, IRBIA is a member of Bioenergy Europe. And yet you're dead right that there is a move within Europe to move towards hydrogen, solar and electric. That is aspirational. At the moment, right now, there is a large lobby in Europe to stop bioenergy, to stop the production of electricity from forests. If that happened, Europe would immediately lose 32% of all of its electricity. There will be a transition to where we hope to be in 2030 or 2040 or 2050, but it has to be a transition, and you have to recognize that. And some of the NGOs don't, and they're just saying, oh, stop forestry because it does this. Why don't they go out and say stop petrol and stop fossil fuels? There has to be a transition, and it has to be managed. And I think that European policy will reflect that when it actually looks at the alternatives if they don't.
Okay, thanks, Michael, for that point. Bring you back in, James, there. A question from Owen here. Are there any plans to reuse the CO2 produced during the fermentation to reduce the carbon footprint further? So if you
brilliant question. Yeah. That's the holy grail. There's a lot of biogenic kind of renewable CO2 emitted from the plant, and it's very clean and easy to capture. So it's perfect CO2. But there's makes no economic sense to do it. Like if we were to capture it, we wouldn't know what to do with it, and we wouldn't know how to store it. So hopefully that will happen. We have invested, we've developed projects to do it, and we're always looking at the things. And if you know of anything, let us know.
Okay. Obviously, and it was the bank, we saw that the plant is on the banks of the Danube. Just a question here from Anthony, does obviously the plant have any impact on the water and the river? And maybe explain the context of the river and its importance, I suppose, James, maybe in terms of the transport of the animal feed or other products?
Yeah, okay. In terms of logistics, we've got a truckload of grain coming into the plant every 10 minutes according to pre-arranged slots so that you don't get peaks and traffic. And then we have about every 20 minutes to half an hour, we have a truckload of ethanol heading a couple of kilometers down the road to our own railway spur, where it's loaded onto our own trains. And from there it goes off to, typically Poland, Germany, maybe Italy, as ethanol. And on the river side, most of the DGS animal feed goes into barges on the river, and then that heads off to its markets from there. And obviously the life of the river is very important because sometimes you can have floods or very low levels, and that would impact our logistics. But regarding the water, yeah, we do have some water going into the river. The only thing I tell you is that the water that we put in the river is definitely cleaner than the water that's already in there. And essentially, the production of ethanol is an organic process. There are no kind of toxic chemicals used in it, and there are no kind of hidden ingredients that would contaminate any of the materials that we use. I mean, what you get out the other end of our plant, all goes is okay. The carbon dioxide that Owen mentioned immediately just a minute ago. You've got some water. Most of the water is recycled, and that water goes into the river, but it's clean water. And to give you an idea of how clean it is, the other things that we produce in the plant are the animal feed and the ethanol, and you can eat both of those. Obviously, we don't eat too much of them, but you can eat our animal feed and you can eat our ethanol, and none of it has any kind of, chemicals or toxins in it. So essentially, we're a food factory, and everything that comes out is edible.
Okay, two questions here, James. One from Cara and one from Dermot, kind of linked, and I'll take them together because time is, and we have one final question then. So, given the manufacture of biogas or biofuels has been identified in the EU taxonomy for sustainable finance in 2020, does GM see low-cost finance now entering the market? And then just another question, which is slightly linked, with the success that you've seen, this from Dermot, and that you have in Hungary, do you have plans to expand elsewhere in Europe? So if you could maybe take those two questions together, James, because we are running out of time. We've only a minute left.
Yeah, okay. Well, finance has never been the problem. It's just that you won't get finance, whether it's cheap or expensive finance, for projects that aren't viable. Finance has never been as low cost as it is now either. So that's not the question. The question is of whether or not the business itself is viable. And that's a much bigger one. We'd need another hour on that, which I'd be happy to do, or I'd bring some people on to do it. Regarding success we have in Hungary, yeah, we do. We've got a couple of projects emerging in under development outside of Hungary, or in countries nearby. And we've also a couple of projects emerging in Ireland, but which I'll hopefully tell you about in a future webinar.
Okay, and just a final question, is probably a technical question. Is there a hydrolysis process required in the EAD plant? I think it is at hydrolysis.
No. I mean, it's an anaerobic digestion plant, so I don't. Unless I'm missing something, I'm not aware of any hydrolysis.
Not sure. Well, Patrick, if you wanted to follow up with an email to us, we could pass it on to James if you want further clarification. One last question, James, that's just come in on the chat. If you had to mention one or two key points, which would be an ideal policy environment governments should adopt for private sector companies to thrive in renewable energy production, what would they be? What would it be?
Well, in Ireland, that they should import the UK system for biomethane, so do something similar to that, and very quickly.
And is that to do with the transport obligation, James, you refer to, or
heat and transport? Yeah, that biomethane can be used easily for both heat and transport renewable obligations.
Okay.
Obviously, Ireland should move quickly with putting in E10 petrol. It does, it's bizarre. It is Ireland's kind of laggard behaviour is just mind-boggling. And what's
the obstacle, James, in terms of what has to be done? Like, what would it mean for Minister Eamon Ryan now to introduce E10, say, next week in Ireland? What is required? Is it legislation? Is it just a statutory instrument? Is it
just a ministerial, statutory instrument, a ministerial?
And what's the reluctance? Maybe just briefly explain. Do you think?
There's no. There is no reluctance that I can detect. I've been on this. I've spoken to everybody concerned. Everybody's for it. It's just lethargy, there's really nothing to be done to do it. It's just a question of saying it's fine to do it. The fuel suppliers would do it. The fuel suppliers will want to do it very shortly because it's coming in the UK, and in terms of their supply chains, it'll make it much simpler for them if Ireland is on the same standard as the UK. There's no technology barriers, no cost barriers. It doesn't cost anything to the exchequer to do it.
Sean, can I comment?
Michael, yeah, and if you could maybe conclude just your concluding remarks, Michael, that would be great. Yeah,
great.
Finish up.
My opinion, and this is a gross generalization, is that Ireland seems to be wanting to wait until the technologies are fully developed. We know what the solutions are, and then they will implement them. So for instance, when PV first came on the market, the general reaction within Ireland was, and this is 15, 18 years ago, no, we'll wait until PV is more cost effective before we introduce it into the energy mix. Now, while there are advantages to do that, the disadvantage is that Ireland is missing all of its renewable energy targets virtually every year, and we're not moving forwards. And the only way that we got out of the emissions issue was to go and buy credits from another country, which is not what I think we should be doing. In the interim, we should be moving forwards. I just want to say, for anybody gets the opportunity who has an interest in bioethanol, go to Budapest and have a look, because what they're doing, it's a very unusual but a very innovative company, and you can feel the energy when you're there. There's about 50 people in the main office. Most of those are Irish. I think there are about 300 people on the entire site. There's a really strong vibe of innovation and of delivery, and it is inspiring to go and visit.
Very good. Thanks very much, Michael, for that conclusion. James, do you want to just sum up your concluding remarks, and we'll close it at that? I know we're going a couple of minutes over time, and I apologize for that, but I think we've had a very worthwhile discussion. And so, James, maybe just if you want to conclude.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Do get in touch for any reason at all, and hopefully it'll be for a visit. And, you know, the whole point of this was the inspirational nature of this project and this company. Ireland could be, you know, multiplied by 10 or multiplied by 50, it's kind of bioeconomy content within 10 years by applying, I guess, some of the things that made our project possible. And we'd love to be part of that. We will be part of that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, James. Thanks very much for your presentation and for your ongoing support to the Irish Bioenergy Association and membership. And also thanks very much to Michael for your continued work as a director of the association and for contributing this morning. And the third person I'd like to thank is Teresa O'Brien. Thanks very much to Teresa for setting up all of this and on a fortnightly basis ensuring that it runs very smoothly and that we get the webinars advertised and set up. So thanks very much to Teresa for your ongoing efforts. And finally, just thanks to all our participants this morning. We had a great attendance this morning, and we look forward to welcoming you back in 2 weeks' time, and indeed for future webinars where we will be showcasing other members and indeed focusing on other bioenergy topics which are topical at this moment in time. So at that, we will conclude. Again, just to say until the next time, stay safe and take care, and we look forward to chatting to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.